Okay, let's talk about motivation. And specifically, let's talk about lack of motivation. This is something that's incredibly common. A lot of people when they come into therapy, they ask specifically, I feel like I'm lacking motivation. How do I get myself to be more motivated? They feel behind on all the projects that they're working on. They are behind, their house is messy. They're behind on chores. Maybe I'm triggering some of you who are listening right now who are just being reminded of the things that they're not doing right now. But I want to talk about that process of what's going on, the depressive process that happens. It's kind of a spiral, right? And so I want to talk about this kind of normal process that we're in the main ways that we try to compensate for that, ways we try to make ourselves more energized or to get things done, and how that doesn't work. I also want to talk about how the brain is meant to motivate itself. And I want you to be able to leverage the natural ability of your mind to help you in a healthy way engage with meaningful tasks so that you can accomplish something and build something meaningful. Okay, so let's talk about the depressive pattern. And why do I talk about depression there? Well, when we lack motivation, there's a depressive pattern going on. And what that usually looks like is the person knows that they ought to do something. They feel something needs to get done, whether it's a project or a chore. And then they feel some kind of sadness. They feel overwhelmed. They feel flooded. They feel like, I just can't do it. It's too much. And they feel just like this heavy weight, this shutdown, right? In that moment, they need help. They need comfort. They need rest and relief. They need to somehow get some help through this. But instead, they tell themselves, nobody's going to cry for you. Nobody's coming to help you. There's these self-critical voices that swoop in right there. And it can sound like diligence. It can sound like, and we're going to talk about this later with the healthy pattern of what the good version of this is. But in the moment, it can sound like, oh, I'm being diligent. I'm being like a harsh coach who's saying, you got to get off the bed. You got to push yourself. You've got to get this thing done. It can sound helpful, but that harsh self-critical response ends up not soothing the sad, overwhelmed feelings. And so who do you think is going to win? The sad, overwhelmed feelings or the harsh critic? Almost every time it's the sad, overwhelmed feelings that end up winning the day there. We push ourselves, and eventually we pop back into exhaustion. We fall out of it, and then we criticize ourselves more. How come you couldn't do it? Why couldn't you stay focused? Why couldn't you make this happen? And that becomes a cycle, right? Because as soon as we feel that, we start to feel depressed again, right? And it goes down and down and down until we just feel completely exhausted. All kinds of tips and tricks I know that there are for people of like, oh, just try doing it before 9 o'clock, or try drinking caffeine, or try not getting sugar. All these things, these are all different variants of trying to overstep or hack or get rid of this overwhelmed feeling that we have, this feeling that we're alone, this feeling like I can't do it. I need rest. I need a break. Okay, so let's talk about maybe why this happens. Okay, the reason we're in this depressive pattern is because often for those people who experience that kind of self-criticism, they've had experiences early on in their life where they really did need help. They were overwhelmed. Things were too much and they didn't get any. They instead got criticized. They got the rolling of the eye from the parents who just felt like, again, you're crying to me again. I don't want to listen to you anymore. You cut it out. Stop it, right? Or go to your room. I don't want to hear it, right? Or the parent who just sighs and goes, ugh, right? And where does that leave the kid, right? What did you learn from that experience? Well, as kids, what you end up learning that you carry forward into adulthood is, I guess no one's around to help me. I guess I really am a burden when I feel this way. I guess when I feel this way, I can't really do anything about it. That is depression. So when you're talking about a lack of motivation, when you're frustrated at yourself, you are somewhere on this depressive spiral down into exhaustion. Okay, so I want to talk to you about how your brain is meant to work. That's a really common experience, by the way. A lot of people have that experience. Don't want you to feel alone in that. Okay, so let's talk about how the mind is meant to work with these things. Okay, there are a couple important brain areas that are all meant to work in concert together and to flow. And we're going to use a couple analogies. One is kind of like a marathon, right? We can think of a marathon as like a goal accomplishment that involves a lot of effort and a lot of hope and trust and foresight. All these things are involved in that kind of planning. So let's talk about that in terms of motivation. But we're also going to talk about like a balance beam versus a high wire as an image that I want you to hold in mind. Okay. So the first area we're going to talk about is your limbic system. So you might have heard of this with your amygdala, right? Your fight or flight system. This has to do with your body's sensing of how much certain information has to do with your safety. So if something is related to your safety or your harm, your emotions shoot up, right? So for example, you get an email and it's like, ASAP, I need this from you right now, right? You're like, oh shoot, my job might be on the line. I better do this. I don't want someone to be mad at me because that could spell, maybe I'd get dismissed, right? Loosely kind of coordinated or correlated to your safety. But then as you're typing out that email, let's say you hear a gunshot or even a loud noise behind you, right? Now what's your emotional system doing? Now it is not just spiking your blood pressure and your heart rate, it is orienting your attention to this other thing, right? You're motivated, right? You're energized to figure this thing out, right? So there's a certain level which our emotional system is cueing us to what is the most important thing to work on, what is going to be the most helpful to my long-term safety. The problem is sometimes there are so many signals of unsafety in our lives that we are flooded. And this is where the lack of motivation comes in, or depression comes in, where we're so flooded with everything going on around us that we just feel totally overwhelmed, right? So the first thing we want to do when we think about trying to get ourselves motivated again or energized again is we want to think about establishing safety. Sometimes this looks like taking a moment and expressing or practicing gratitude. Sometimes this looks like getting a hug from your partner or from a friend or from a mom or dad, right? Getting a hug or even just talking about how you're doing, talking about your feelings, talking about what's going on in your life, sharing those experiences, sharing what you're feeling can be a wonderful way to reduce your stress, to reduce your unsafety so that you can actually work, so you can do things that are important to you. We want to think about it kind of like, if things are on a high wire versus down on a balance beam, right? So if you feel like you're up on a high wire, like there's so many things riding on you, it feels like you're 200 feet up in the air. If you take one step, you're going to fall. What are you going to do? You're going to freeze up. Can you picture that? Can you picture being up there? And it's like any move you make, you're going to fall, right? This is the situation. My palms are getting kind of sweaty just talking about that, right? But this is the situation that a lot of us find ourselves in, where we are so overloaded by things that it is hard to actually move forward in the day. Okay, because it's not just about we have so many things, but it's that we don't have enough support for those things. We don't have enough safety. Okay, so the next part is our prefrontal cortex. This is involved in long-term goal planning as well, in motivation, where once we get a cue of something that's important to our well-being and we're not flooded, we start to plan long-term. What are the pieces I need to put in place to make this happen? What are the goals? What are the sub-goals, right? And a lot of us, when we had like attuned caregivers, parents who were paying attention to us and helping us, they would do things like they would say, oh, you got a lot of homework. Hey, let's chunk it up. Let's stop. Let's do this, this, and this. Okay, we're not going to watch TV until all these things are done. There's 5 things. Let's do number 1. Okay, we're done. We're done with that one. Now let's do number 2, right? This kind of chunking up of all the steps can be something that we can overlook, right? When we're so flooded, it can be hard to do that because everything just feels overwhelming. It can feel like, we're looking at a mountain and we just get overwhelmed. When we use our prefrontal lobe, our prefrontal cortex, we can think about behavioral activation, which is your left hemisphere, and your behavioral inhibition, which is your right hemisphere. Behavioral inhibition is a part of your mind that when you go to do a project or homework or something, will tell you, okay, stop doing X, Y, and Z. If we really need to not do this so that something bad doesn't happen, right? So we can't watch TV right now, for example, because we're not going to get to our goal, okay? The behavioral activation system is all about prioritizing or putting things in a row of what you should do, right? Okay, we're going to have to open up the folder. Then we're going to have to, write down the first sentence. Then we're going to have to write down the second sentence. Then we're going to have to review and double check for spelling, right? All those little sub goals are what your prefrontal lobe does to kind of try to put things in a row behaviorally so that you can actually get to your goal, right? So the smaller you can chunk those things up, the better. So sometimes you think about, if you're overwhelmed by a task, don't even just go, okay, I got to get this done by noon. Say, okay, what's the smallest thing I have to do in the first minute? So for example, I literally just need to start by opening up the application or even opening up my computer. I'm just going to start there. And that's going to be the first thing that I do. A lot of us can miss these things and we get so flooded that we don't do the small little thing that's right in front of us. Okay, so that's the first thing we could think about doing. Okay, we're good. Okay, so the third part, which is the most important part, is your ventral striatum. This is your reward center. It's kind of like right here in your brain. It's kind of back up over the frontal lobe. And this area of your brain has everything to do with social reward. This is really important. The rewards that you want to place at the end of your goal are not chocolate and caffeine or even like a vacation. These are not the rewards that we want to place. The rewards we want to place are twofold. First of all, they're incredibly social, meaning that the more social you make the reward, the more it's going to stick, the more motivating it's going to be. So think about who's going to know about this when you get it done. Who are you going to tell about this? How many people are you going to involve in this project, right? What are you going to do to celebrate with them when it's done? These things, start to imagine these things, start to write them down. Okay, when I get this done, we're going to have a party, or I'm going to call this person on the phone and tell them about it. I'm going to share this thing with somebody else and they're going to be excited about it. Okay. So we can start to think about that. First, social. Second of all, it's going to be meaningful. Okay. It's going to have something to do with the person that you want to become in your life. Right. So if you can tie the goal to helping you become the version of yourself that you want to be, it's going to stick that much more. For example, if you know that you want to be like this person that you admire, or that you want to be, let's say, responsible, or that you want to be a helper to other people, if you want to be somebody who is, name any virtue, humble, whatever it is, you want to attach the goal to that. So if I get this project done, I'm going to be responsible the way that my grandfather was with me, right? Or the way that my mom was to me, right? If I get this done, then I'm going to be helping people. I'm going to be helping people the way that I wish I could have been helped, right? I'm going to be paying it forward to them. I'm going to be doing something good in the world that makes me feel like I'm a helpful person, right? How can you tie the goal that you're trying to get accomplished today? How can you tie that to something meaningful and something social? The more that you can do that, the more you're going to motivate yourself to move through and to accomplish this task. Again, the thing that's going to keep you stuck is self-criticism. That's the only thing standing in your way. The rest of these pieces, the social piece, the meaning piece, planning it, all those things happen a lot better and actually naturally when we reduce the self-criticism. And reducing the self-criticism, kind of taking that gunk out of the way so that we can do what our mind is meant to do, that involves therapy often. And the reason is because we want to get to know that part of ourselves. The self-criticism, this is a long-standing pattern that deserves exploration, that deserves empathy. You really want to get to know this part so that you can kind of imagine balling it up and putting it to the side whenever it comes up so that you can stay focused on who you want to be. That's what we're here to help you with. That's what this journey is about. But so I hope that's helpful to you. When you think about getting things done, when you think about lack of motivation, I want you to think less about being disciplined, right? And more about actually reducing the flooding that's coming in, increasing the safety so that you can create and achieve meaningful goals that matter to you and that matter to others.